Hey everybody, this is Minion Soldier, and today we're looking at the Javelin, probably one of the hardest ships to guess a release date for, but we'll get into that. So let's get started with the biggest ship you can buy in the Star Citizen universe, the Javelin. Now, the Javelin is one of only two destroyers in the Star Citizen universe. And if you're saying, what, there's two? There is a Vanduul destroyer called the Hunter, but I decided not to put an image of it up on screen after this edit, or at least in this edit of the video, because I figured it might be a spoiler and some people would freak out about it. So, there are two, this is one. Now, the Javelin was initially released for sale on November the 27th, 2014, during the anniversary sale, and it caused a bit of a stir. As you would assume, a ship this big, this powerful, there was a lot of orgs that were out to get it, and obviously there were a limited number of them. Typically they go out in batches of 1,000 in 4 sales of 250 apiece. So with quantities being that limited, there's a great surge to go out there and get them. And after the first sale, a number of orgs were left in the dust, and a number of players as well, with nothing to show for it. One of the big problems that came along with it was that a number of players had entirely liquidated their fleets prior to the sale in hopes of picking up a Javelin destroyer, and not realizing that quantities were so limited, obviously some people were left empty-handed with their entire fleets liquidated. And that kind of put a heavy burden on CIG for requests to unmelt ships. And so the buyback token system was brought in later on. And, you only get one buyback token per quarter. So there was some discord over that issue. But the protracted development time of Star Citizen has pretty much allowed all those players to reconstitute their fleets, and since then the inception of the Polaris probably satisfied a fair bit of that angst. Now, for the players who actually did successfully acquire the ship, there were still some hurdles to get over because a number of people didn't read the fine print, and that was that all the Javelins that are purchased are stripped of their weapons. The lore reason for this is that, of course, Star Citizen happens after the events of Squadron 42, which is this big war with the Vanduul. And the sale of the Javelins represents a period after that war where the UEE military is drawing down and selling off surplus equipment. So the Javelins have been stripped of their weapons and are now being sold on the civilian market. So even though there was a listing of all the weapon systems that the ship has, it in fact comes with none of them. And that was a bit of a rude awakening for some people. One of the things that's going to happen if you do own a Javelin is you're going to have to absorb not only the cost up front of purchasing the vessel, but once the vessel arrives in game, you're going to need to have the money in hand to equip the ship so that it can go out there, fight, and defend itself. The release date of the ship actually becomes very important because players are going to need to know how much lead time they have in order to build up a supply of the equipment, ammunition, fuel, whatever they need, so that obviously on day one they can take their ship out and start playing with it. Now, trying to figure out what a possible release date or release date window would be for this ship really kind of hangs around two factors. One, when are they going to release it? Is it going to be after Squadron 42? More than likely. I think that is pretty much an absolute. But another thing you have to factor in is will the game support the ship? And I don't just mean graphically or functionally, but are there systems within the game to allow the ship to exist? Because a ship like this is going to have very high maintenance costs, weapon costs, crew costs, and all of those have to be factored in into any possible earnings that this ship can make. So there's got to be missions to support it, and those missions have to pay out appropriately in order to allow this ship to basically survive and not, drive the owner broke while they're operating it. Given all these things, I think it's safe to say that the Javelin will probably be released in the game at a point where there are in-game systems to support it, at least financially, probably a few systems available, with one at least having some form of capital Vanduul presence within that system to allow for at least some kind of bounty mission, fighting them and earning money to support the ship and all the weapons aboard it and the crew. But also early enough to allow players to experiment with the ship and potentially lose the ship and see what it can and can't do, so that they're better prepared for once the game hits its official, once it crosses that point where everything really counts, so players aren't so much shocked when they lose the ship and they realize that in terms of insurance, you don't just say, oh, I lost my Javelin, click, okay, here's a new Javelin. No, that ship has to be built in universe. So the rebuild time on a ship like this probably going to be somewhere in the weeks. So I would say at the minimum it would take 2 weeks to rebuild this ship, so players are going to need a little time to experiment with it before that loss really counts. Now, for a while we've heard stories that there is a flyable Javelin, that they've been flight testing the Javelin, playing with it. But the question always is, well, when do we get to see the Javelin? Of course, the first chance we'll probably get to see it is in Squadron 42. And oddly enough, that's kind of where the Javelin is held up, and one of the factors is the 3.0 release. Because if you go back to when they were talking about the Javelin last year, where a lot of this footage comes from, one of the things that they said was that the Javelin for Squadron 42 is going to be built off of the back of the Javelin that's being built for the Persistent Universe, which also kind of goes along with the statements that CIG has made in regards to Squadron 42, saying that 3.0 has to be released before Squadron 42 can be finished, because a lot of the systems that are required to make Squadron 42 possible are part of 3.0. Now, with 3.0's release date unfortunately continuing to slide, it kind of puts a nail in the coffin of us seeing Squadron 42 during 2017, and makes it look more like a 2018 release, which, coupled with that and the factors that I mentioned before, makes it highly unlikely that we'll see the Javelin in-game prior to the fall of 2018. The Javelin, of course, being the biggest ship that you can buy and probably the toughest customer in the Star Citizen universe in terms of overall defensive strength that you can purchase. I think that, when I was talking about the Polaris and I said, one of the advantages was that the Polaris was fast and you could use that mobility as an advantage to attack your enemy where they're weak and not where they're strong. Well, where the Javelin is going to be where your enemy is strong. So what you're getting for the ship is probably a key asset for protecting your most valuable ships, your most important fleets. And taking this ship down is probably going to take a very concentrated effort, and it's probably going to cost you a few ships in the attempt. I think in the end, the Javelin is going to represent an endgame ship for the players who want to be fighting pitched battles against other capital ships, who have critical assets that they need to defend. Players who are looking for that kind of big capital ship, epic space battle feel for the game are probably going to love their Javelins. And they're probably going to walk right past that initial setup cost because they'll have already factored it in and already be prepared for this ship when it does arrive. It is definitely going to be a force to be reckoned with once it's released. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this brief look at the Javelin, and thanks for watching.